are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and the practices of great military leaders, all by way of distilling from them lessons that we can apply to our business and professional lives. This is a way for me as a military veteran to give back something to you, my fellow citizens, who so doggedly supported the U.S. military and continue to do so. Billions of dollars are spent on training us and supporting us, and this is just a little way, just a tiny piece of giving back and helping you realize some kind of return on that investment, shall we say? And I'm pleased to mention that this show, Business Lessons from the Military, is sponsored by the Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. And this is an organization where civilians and military people can come together for the overall betterment of the sea services and our country. I'll talk more about that partway through the show. So today, I've been promoting this show as battle stations. In the Navy, the United States Navy, we have something called general quarters. And I'm going to play a clip from one of my favorite movies that shows you what general quarters is. But just in short, it's what a ship does when there's an emergency, when there's a crisis. And so, for example, when I was with with Submarine Squadron 11, Subron 11 down in Point Loma, I was underway on a submarine, and all of a sudden the general quarters alarm went off. I was in my rack, that's Navy for bed at the time. And being that I was a chaplain in the Navy, so on a submarine, I didn't have a general quarters statement. So my job was to stay in my rack and keep out of the way. And what had happened was there was a fire in the nuclear reactor space, if you can imagine, right? And we're underwater, I should add. We're not on the surface, right? And so the damage control team responded, and within a few minutes, they got the fire under control. And shortly thereafter, the executive officer came over the 1MC, that's the sort of the public address system on a ship, and let us all know that the crisis was over. It had been handled, and basically stand down from general quarters. So in a ship's context, that's an emergency. In our businesses and professions, hopefully our crises are not so dire. They're not, a risk to life, although sometimes they could be. I want to mention two that have happened rather recently. One is what happened to Boeing last year in 2024. It lost a door plug. Well, one of its planes flown by Alaska Airlines lost a door plug, and it blew out this door, and the plane had to make an emergency landing, right? And of course, anytime something like that happens to an airline, it's a major. It makes major news. One of the reasons that I think it makes major news is these things actually don't happen very often. Flying is so safe. It's safer than riding in a car, and for Boeing, this was one in a string of incidents that had happened over several years. That was kind of the latest one. And all of a sudden, once again, Boeing had a crisis on its hands. It also faced a labor strike in September of 2024. 33,000 machinists went on a month-long strike. They rejected a contract offer, and Boeing subsequently announced plans to cut 17,000 jobs, about 10% of its global workforce. It reported a $6 billion loss in the quarter, and it required that it raise additional funds. In this case, was $19 billion from investors in order to stay as a viable company. So, the first one is more of a safety crisis, if you will. The second one was a financial crisis. Okay, and then Delta Airlines in July of 2024, it experienced a major operational disruption due to a computer system failure. It was linked to the CrowdStrike incident, if you recall, and this led to the cancellation of over 7,000 flights over 5 days, and it affected over 1 million passengers. And of course, the U.S. Department of Transportation initiated an investigation into Delta for, among other things, potential violation of consumer rights. And the airline now faces a class action lawsuit from passengers who were stranded. So again, in Delta Airlines case, this is a financial crisis, as well as a public relations crisis, right? Delta builds their image as a reliable airline that's going to get you where you want to go, and here it is, in all these cases, these were not exactly self-inflicted wounds, so to speak. I mean, I suppose you could make the case they didn't have enough, safety or backup systems in place. But many times, a crisis is arising in a business due to some unanticipated and probably very difficult, if not impossible to anticipate situation that then impacts our business. And so, what are we going to do, right? What you're going to do, or hopefully what you will do after watching this show, is you will develop battle stations, or what we call in the Navy a general quarters plan. So I'm gonna share. It's a short clip about 2 minutes long, and it's from one of my favorite movies. It's a movie called In Harm's Way. It stars virtually every popular male actor of the day: John Wayne, Douglas, Kirk Douglas, Burgess Meredith, Henry Fonda, and a number of lesser known male actors, that's redundant, actors, and a number of well-known female actresses, including one of my favorite, Paula Prentice. So this clip, so the movie In Harm's Way begins essentially on December 7th, 1941, known now as Pearl Harbor Day, the Imperial Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And so, the clip is about 1.5 minutes long, and this is a crisis leading to the call for general quarters. Let's just watch this so you can see how this works in the Navy.
On a submarine contact inside the defensive sea area.
Some poor Joe's really got it in the ringer now. Attacking one of our own subs.
Better commence evasive zigzag pattern, Commander. Set extra lookouts.
Aye, aye, sir. Morning, Captain.
Good morning, Commander Eddington, and how are you this fine day?
Splendid. Thank you, sir. What's the alert?
Well, the Picket Destroyer Ward dropped some depth charges on what they think is a sub about 15 miles from here, near the Seaboy.
And another poor whale lost its blubber.
Sir?
Yes?
Well, we're just looking for subs or planes, too.
Anything, son.
Well, there's a large formation of planes orbiting north of the island, sir.
Looks like they got the pilots up early for squadron exercises.
A strange place to rendezvous. Why aren't they over Diamond Head where they belong?
Sir, there's a formation off Diamond Head, too.
I don't like it, Paul. Sound general quarters, making no drill.
Yes, sir.
This is not a drill. This is not a drill. General quarters. General quarters.
So there you see. Sorry about that. The video continued on. So what you saw there is John Wayne is the captain of an old cruiser. It was a medium to large size naval vessel at that time. A submarine had launched, a United States Navy destroyer had dropped depth charges on what it thought was a Japanese submarine, which there were many Japanese submarines that did get into Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And so John Wayne calls for additional lookouts, puts the ship on kind of on alert, if you will. And then the next thing they noticed is there's planes, a group of planes in a location where they're not expected to be. And he, John Wayne rightly realizes that something bad is going on, and he calls general quarters. And you saw the trumpeter blows the call, and then the sailor behind him, who was, I suspect, was a bosun, calls general quarter. This is not a drill. This is not a drill. General quarters, right? And all of the sailors come pouring out of the ship. You saw they were holding on to their life vests and their helmets, and they take their various general quarter stations, whether it's as gunners, whether it's in a damage control station if the ship is damaged and something needs to be fixed. As the movie continues, in fact, the John Wayne ship gets hit by a torpedo, and they send a damage control crew down to stop the water coming into the ship under the direction of Kirk Douglas. He's the executive officer for the ship, and eventually the destroyer, which is where the action starts. They rig to tow the cruiser back into Pearl Harbor. So the idea here is, while the scene we saw in this movie clip was not a drill, during normal ship's operation, periodically they would have general quarters drills, so that every single sailor and officer on that ship knew what to do if general quarters was called and the ship faced some kind of crisis. Now, it's interesting to note, if we keep in mind historically, and of course this is a movie, so what happens in the movie didn't literally actually happen, but it's very true to life for the Navy. So although we were not, the U.S. Navy and the United States were not at war, in 1941 until December 8th, 1941, all ships practice going to general quarters. They drill on this so that any given sailors or officers' actions are essentially automatic. So when they hear that call of general quarters, they know exactly where to go, exactly what they may be called upon to do. So I'll from my time in the Navy, when I was with Carrier Air Wing 14. So when we were embarked on our ship, the USS Ronald Reagan, a nuclear aircraft carrier, like every other member of the ship's company, I had a general quarters station. And so when general quarters was called, I had to go to it was actually in the tower for the carrier, into an area where wounded would be brought, and taken care of. So I was there with people from medical division, and other sailors who were there, perhaps for, to bear stretchers, those kind of things. And if somebody was wounded, I was there to give them, render them comfort. I couldn't give them last rites because I'm not a Catholic priest. I'm a rabbi, but at least give them some kind of comfort, in their distress, and God forbid, if they were going to die. So, and we had general quarters drills on a regular basis. I don't recall exactly how often, but I think at least a couple times a month, we would practice this. And we had to make sure we had certain gear on, our float coats, for example, because when you're on an aircraft carrier, if there's any chance that you're going to be on deck, you have to have a float coat on. It's essentially a life vest, but it's a special life vest because, among other things, when you hit the water, it causes a light to come on so that you can be seen in the dark, those kind of things. So this is something we drilled and drilled and drilled so that we would be able to execute when the time came. Now, underlying every general quarters drill, or I should say not every general quarters drill, but underlying general quarters drills was an assessment of what kind of emergencies might we face. Okay, so nuclear aircraft carrier, right? Biggest ship, biggest naval ship in the world. Okay, not as big as some of the container ships and oil tankers probably, but still the largest combatant ship in the world. So and also one of the fastest ships. We could sail faster than our escorts. We usually had a cruiser in our task group, and we might have some destroyers as well. So we could sail faster than they could, right? So where is crisis going to come from? Well, nonetheless, especially if we were close enough to land, we in theory we could be attacked by land-based aircraft. We could be attacked by other ships. We could be attacked by a submarine. Okay, those would be the sort of combat type emergencies that we might face. Now, when I was in the Navy, we were involved with the global war on terrorism, but we weren't at war with any major naval power. Probably the biggest competitor to United States Navy is the Communist Chinese Navy. It goes by the it's like the Army Navy something or other. I forget the exact name, but so the reality was our being attacked at sea was remote at most. Okay, but there could be other potential casualties. So, for example, both of our, if for some reason both of our nuclear reactors shut down, now the ship is dead in the water. And if we had aircraft aloft, they would not have been able to land on the deck of a carrier. I mean, the helicopters could have, of course, but neither the turboprop nor the jet aircraft can land on the deck of an aircraft carrier when it's not moving. They would overfly the deck. So all of those aircraft would have had to have ditched. Meaning they would have had to land in the water. The crewmen would have had, the pilot and if there were other crewmen, would have had to have gotten out. The helicopters would be launched to rescue them. The ship almost for sure would have gone to general quarters. to make sure that number one, everybody was on heightened alert. Number two, all what were called the battle. I'm sorry, not the battle dress stations. The stations like the one I was at to handle wounded were manned, and so that people taken out of the water could be brought there if necessary for triage before they were taken down to the medical spaces. And if there were a lot of aircraft, it's not at all clear that there would have been enough space in the medical spaces to accommodate all of the crew members who might potentially have been impacted. To land in the water, if the water is cold, they could have been suffering from hypothermia, depending on how long they had been in the water. So these are the kinds of things that had to be thought about. And that were, at least in part, anticipated in our general quarters drills. And so for our businesses, we need to be thinking about the same kinds of issues. So first of all, what kind of casualties, casualties is one category. What kind of crises might we face in our businesses? First of all, there are financial crises, like the couple that I mentioned with the airlines, or one was an airlines and one was an airplane manufacturing company. So our business could face a financial crisis. We could lose a major client. I know when I had my real estate company, foolishly, I allowed my business to get to a point where it was reliant on one client for over 50% of its revenue. And then at one point, that client decided they didn't want to work with a small organization like mine anymore. And so they dropped me. And all of a sudden, bang, I lost, essentially overnight 50% of my revenue. Now that was before I was in the Navy. I wish I had the advice I'm giving you now back then, so that I might have been better prepared to deal with that crisis. So where is your business financially vulnerable, and where do those vulnerabilities exist in a way that, for example, insurance won't help, right? So you can get things like business interruption insurance, and it can pay some, or at least some, if not all, of the costs of keeping your business operating. It probably won't replace lost revenue, certainly not all the lost revenue, right? And that may be, by the way, part of your general quarters plan, is to have business interruption insurance if it's available for the type of business that you have. But besides financial crises, so if you live here in California, what would happen if if there was an earthquake that significantly damaged your place of business, or the equipment you need to run your business, or maybe the vehicles that you need to operate your business? What would happen if the earthquake were so bad that you couldn't deliver your products, if you're in some kind of product business? And by the way, I'm using California as an example, but in the Southeast, what would happen if there were a hurricane that caused the same kind of problem? Or if you're in the Midwest, what if there were a tornado caused the same kind of problems? What would be your response? How would you deal with that crisis? So these are just a couple of the examples of the categories of crises that businesses face, be they financial, be they physical, be they reputational, right? If you recall, this is going back a while, so this, I think this is back in I want to say the 1980s. So some lunatic basically poisoned some containers of Tylenol and left them on the shelf in a drugstore. Some customers bought them, and they took the Tylenol, and I believe it killed several people. And all of a sudden, Tylenol, which was a a highly respected brand. I mean, we refer to acetaminophen as Tylenol because Tylenol was the original Tylenol was the original brand under which acetaminophen was sold. So all of a sudden, Tylenol went from being a highly sought after painkiller to nobody wanted to touch it, right? Again, a tremendous crisis. This is reputational or public relations crisis, however you want to, whatever terms you want to use. But what would be, if you have such a vulnerability in your business, what would you do in order to handle that crisis effectively? And my suggestion is you have a general quarters plan. You send your people, maybe not literally, but you have people take their battle stations to deal with the crisis. So before I map out what you need for a general quarters plan, I do want to recognize our sponsor, which is the Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. So the Navy League has been around for over 100 years, and it is an organization that supports what are known as the sea services, which are the United States Marine Corps, the United States Navy, the United States Coast Guard, and the United States Merchant Marine. All four of them together constitute what are known as the sea services because all of them go to sea. Makes sense. And the Navy League of the United States has a three-part mission, and they spell out the acronym C: support, educate, and advocate. So in the Beverly Hills Council, we support a Sea Service Cadet unit. We're looking to reach out to some junior Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps programs at high schools. We have historically supported the Naval Reserve Officer Training Program at the University of California at Los Angeles. So those are some of the support activities that the Beverly Hills Council of the United States Navy League engages in. Education, we educate people about what the sea services do so that they can better understand the Marine Corps, Navy, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine, and its part in our National Defense Plan. And then finally, advocate. So we advocate on a nonpartisan basis for the sea services. So most recently, a call went out from the Navy League of the United States to the individual councils that there was a bill that had been sponsored in Congress to make sure that if the government shut down, that all service members would be considered essential personnel, and they would continue to receive their pay despite the government shutdown. Now, this is something near and dear to me because when I was with Subron 11, there was a government shutdown, and although the Subron wanted me to stay on because of how the shutdown happened, they sent me home instead. I was a reservist at the time on active duty, and they canceled my active duty. So these are the kinds of activities in which the Navy League engages. And if you are interested in helping, I'm the president of the Beverly Hills Council. If you are interested in helping us meet our mission, I encourage you to go to NavyLeague.org and join our organization. Make sure you designate that your council is the Beverly Hills Council, so you'll be included in our roster and you'll get information about all the various activities. All right, so going back to our show then, this is Business Lessons from the Military with, I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're talking about how to deal with a crisis in your business or professional practice. And I mentioned some types of crises, financial, physical, reputational, or public relations crises. And the solution based on what I learned in the military is to have a general quarters plan, which is a plan about what each person in your organization needs to do at the time of crises. So I've got 7 points that I want to go over to help you develop such a plan. So first of all, each person in your organization needs to have a clear role and responsibility during the, once general quarters is called. So once a crisis has developed, once a crisis has occurred, so you have a crisis response team, okay, and that each member of that team should have a clearly defined role, whether it's communications, whether it's operations, whether it's finance, whether it's legal, whether it's information technology, okay. Each person on the crisis management team should know immediately what their role is. So the moment they are notified, launch crisis response team, call to general quarters, right? Like we would in the Navy. Each person immediately knows, okay, when there's a crisis, this is what I need to do. Now, by the way, it may not require every person who works for your organization to be a part of that crisis response team. So for some of the people in your organization, when general quarters is called, what they know is, their job may be just stay out of the crisis response team's way, let them deal with it. But beyond that, keep out of it, right? Don't be talking to the press. Don't be talking, don't be calling up customers. If a customer calls upset, maybe their sole job, of someone who's not on the crisis support team or crisis response team is to pass them along to a member of that team. So, not everyone may be actively involved in dealing with the crisis. Some people may even, their job may be just go home, right? If there's physical damage so that the organization can't operate, perhaps the best thing for some of the people is just to go home, be out of the way, be out of potential danger, and just wait for updates and wait to be recalled back to the business. Okay, so number one, clear roles and responsibilities. Number two, rapid mobilization and coordination. So every member of your crisis response team should be thoroughly briefed on the crisis response plan, and they should know who to contact, what steps to take as soon as a crisis arises, and what designated communication channels to use. So should they use email? Should they use some kind of messaging apps? Should they use telephone, right? Now, if maybe your IT system is down, okay, so you're not going to be able to use email or messaging apps on your computer. So maybe they have to fall back on cell phones. Now, for a small business, maybe they don't issue company cell phones to every employee. So then maybe there's an expectation that the employees will use their personal cell phones. Make sure there's no employment laws that you're violating or something like that. I mean, I can imagine, especially like in a state like California, requiring employees to use their personal cell phones for business could potentially be problematic. So look into how are we going to be able to communicate. Now, the reverse might be that, let's say there's an earthquake and cell towers have been destroyed, and so cell service is interrupted. Okay, so we may not be able to communicate by voice because it takes too much bandwidth, but you may be able to communicate through text messages, which don't take as much bandwidth. Now, do you want to use text messages, which maybe can be intercepted, or do you want to use some kind of encrypted communication system to make sure that your messages aren't getting out to the press or to the public in a way that you don't want them to be, right? The recent incident with members of the Trump administration using Signal, right, and ending up having somebody in their group that shouldn't have been, right? So what are you going to do to make sure that the people with whom you're communicating are members of the crisis response team. And other people who shouldn't be in on there have not inadvertently been included or haven't somehow gotten into your private group. Okay, so again, members of the crisis response team, they should know who to contact, what steps to take initially until they get further direction, and through what communication, through what channels communication should occur, depending on the various depending on what the situation is, and what channels may be available. Okay, number 3, chain of command and decision making. So on a ship, there's a very strict chain of command. So my commanding officer was a Navy captain. He was known as CAG, which is short for Commander Air Group. That's actually an old term that comes from World War II. He's not officially a CAG anymore. He's the commanding officer of the Air Wing. But in any event, even the CAG reports to the captain of the ship. So the captain of the ship, unless the strike group commander is on board, the captain of the ship is the most senior member of the ship's company. And so whatever decisions need to be made, they flow from the captain down. Now, the captain will oftentimes delegate decision-making authority. So, for example, when it comes to dealing with the nuclear reactor on the ship, he's probably going to delegate a lot of authority to the nuclear propulsion officer, who's a commander of an O5, because he's an expert in that, with the expectation that that officer is going to be communicating with the captain and keeping him informed of what's going on, what may need to be done, the decisions he's making, etc. Okay, so the same thing is true in a crisis for a business. There should be one person who's designated captain, if you will, of the crisis response team. And that person has the ultimate responsibility for how the crisis is going to be handled. Having said that, part of your crisis response plan should be what authority is going to be delegated to whom, so that each member of the crisis response team knows what their responsibilities are, what the extent of their authority is, and they can start exercising it as quickly as possible to deal with the crisis at hand. Okay, so there should be a leadership structure that's in place that all the members of the crisis team know about, okay? And this will enable them to quickly make authoritative decisions in order to deal with the crisis. Even the people in your organization who are not members of the crisis response team should understand what the leadership structure is, so that if they see something that they think is not right, or if they hear about something, they know to whom this information should be reported so that it can be dealt with by the crisis response team. Okay, so as I mentioned a minute ago, although not everybody in your organization may be a formal member of the crisis response team, you want to have everybody in your organization, they should know how to deal with any aspect of the crisis that may come across their desk or come within their knowledge, to make sure that information is gathered, properly distributed, and therefore the crisis can be dealt with as effectively as possible. Now, in general, in a crisis, you probably want to have fairly centralized decision-making authority to make sure that everything is being well coordinated and the crisis is being dealt with in the proper focused way. However, as I mentioned with the nuclear reactor, or reactors actually, on a nuclear aircraft carrier, there's going to be specialized needs in the crisis response depending on what the crisis is. And so some of the decision making may need to be delegated to specialists. So if there was a collapse in computer systems, okay, so whoever is the senior IT person on the crisis response team probably needs to have a fairly high level of authority delegated to him in order to quickly and effectively deal with that crisis, okay? And now you might think, well, what about public relations? Do the PR people get authority delegated to them? Well, perhaps they do, but probably not as much as someone with a technical specialty like IT, because in the end, the senior member of the crisis response team is ultimately responsible for the reputation of the company. He's probably not going to want to delegate that ultimate authority. So he may only delegate some authority to the person in charge of public relations so that they can, issue messages of, I'm going up on the word, but they can sort of calm concerns about the company. Messages of reassurance is the word I was looking for. Okay, but they may not have control over the ultimate message. That would be something they would probably develop with the most senior members of the crisis response team. Okay, so number 3, chain of command and decision making. Number 4, containment and damage control. So as I mentioned in the film clip at the beginning of the show, so John Wayne's cruiser gets hit by a torpedo, water is flowing in, right? And so in the Navy, we have a saying, ship shipmates self. In other words, if the ship is in danger, everything else takes second place, because if the ship is going to sink, and nothing else really matters. Everybody's going to be in the water and in trouble, right? So when there's water flowing in, that is the number one crisis to be dealt with, right? And so when a crisis happens God forbid, at your company or your professional practice, so someone, and it's probably going to be the senior member of the crisis response team, is going to have to make a decision about kind of on a triage basis, what is going to get priority in terms of damage control. Okay, and so through the other members of the crisis response team, through the subordinate members, they need to, and this should all be part of their trained job. They need to know as quickly as possible. They need to funnel to the senior decision maker an assessment of the damage and what containment steps may need to be taken for their area of specialty. Okay, so whether it's finances, whether it's physical loss, PR, IT, whatever that is, they need to assess that. So the leader of the crisis response team can make a decision. Okay, where do we need to contain damage? Where do we need to contain the situation? Where do we need to send or focus on damage control? Okay, and that way, decisions can be made that will hopefully globally limit the amount of damage that happens to the company. Okay, so for example, let's take the case of Delta, where they got hit by the what was it, the CrowdStrike incident. Okay, so they had to cancel all these flights, right? One would assume that, knowing it was essentially an IT crisis that turned into a public relations crisis, that damage control was first of all focused on fixing the the computer systems that had been damaged by the CrowdStrike incident, to get those computers back online and working properly. That would have been number one. And number two was dealing with the public relations fallout of canceling all those thousands of flights and having, over 1 million passengers having their plans disrupted. So step number two in terms of containment and damage control would be, how are we going to deal with all of these passengers who are not going to be able to fly, right? And one would imagine they would have set up phone lines and other means of communication, monitoring social media, so that anytime someone, a passenger was identified whose flight had been canceled, they reached out to them to say, "We're here. Contact us at this number. We will do our best to get you rebooked as quickly as possible." And all of that should have been, one would hope, although I don't think it was the case, all of that should have been part of Delta's crisis plan. Okay. And in the end, one of the keys to containment is to communicate as quickly and as effectively as possible to those people who are impacted by the crisis, whether it's customers, clients, employees, suppliers, maybe even people at government agencies, right? It's always better to be proactive than it is to sit back and let all of this fall on your head, right? And if you're being proactive, then to a certain extent, you control the messaging, the so-called narrative, right? And that can help contain damage as well. Okay, so number 4, containment and damage control. Number 5, drills and preparedness. So you can have the most amazing crisis response plan on the planet, but if your people do not drill in it, they do not practice it, it's not going to do you any good, because they're not going to be able to quickly and effectively implement it when it's cold. So just like on a ship where we had general quarters drills and we had them on a regular basis and we practice doing the various things that we would be called upon to do in a real emergency, so too in a business, there should be a periodic simulation of crises scenarios, so that the members of the crisis response team can practice responding to that crisis. Okay. Now you may say, "Oh my gosh, that's so disruptive to regular operations." Well, yes, it might be, but the 2 or 3 hours you might take once a month or twice a month to practice crisis response, okay, could potentially save you hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of dollars or more in financial loss. It could save you a tremendous amount in loss of goodwill, and it also will show your people that you are very serious about helping them be able to respond well to a crisis, and that alone, as a measure of morale, is very, very important. Now, by the way, you don't necessarily have to do them the way we did them on a ship, which is we would call general quarters and the entire ship would respond, right? You could do, department by department drilling and preparedness, or maybe just, have 2 or 3 departments practicing on a particular day, so that the entire business isn't interrupted, just certain departments. Or maybe you want to pay people some overtime, have them come in after hours in an evening or on a weekend to practice. That's an opportunity as well. And the investment is likely to pay off. Now, of course, you're in the best position to assess just how likely a crisis is to hit your company, and so how much you want to invest in having a general quarters plan. But there's no point in having one that is not drilled and that staff don't have a time to prepare to use. Okay, so number 5, drills and preparedness. Number 6, communications and morale. So we might call this actually leadership. During a crisis, the senior leadership, whether it's the CEO or whether it's department heads, they need to be able to issue calm, clear instructions. Okay, they need to not panic. Okay, so and this is why drilling and preparedness is so important, because if people are well prepared, they're better able to remain calm and project a sense of we've got the situation under control. Everybody knows what they need to do. There's no reason to panic. Okay, so in a company, especially with the employees, in addition to projecting that calm, under control, face, you also want to make sure that especially members of the crisis response team, they know what's going on, throughout the crisis in all areas of the crisis. You want to communicate to employees, to customers, clients, again, to government agencies if they're relevant. You want to have a plan to calmly communicate to them and let them know, keep them apprised of progress being made and dealing with the crisis, so that they don't get spun up and panic because of what's going on. Okay, so again, leadership and paying attention to morale, very, very important. So that's number 6. Okay, and finally, number 7. This doesn't happen during the handling of the crisis itself, but it is an absolutely crucial step in dealing with crises and having a general quarters plan. And that is, after each drill, each training, each preparedness event, and certainly after dealing with an actual crisis, okay, you want to take time post-crisis or post-drill to review what happened and do what's called a hot wash. Now, I talk about a hot wash I think it was last year, pardon me. And it's basically an after action report. So everybody who was involved in responding to the crisis should sit down with the leader of their department or their division, whatever it is, and talk about what happened, how did we respond, how well did that response work, and what could be done better next time. And then those post-crisis reviews need to be collated, and the plan may need to be revised based on that input. And in that way, the drilling and the actual crisis response can be used in order to respond better next time, right? And so this, again, when we did general quarters drills, this was always after we were called, after secure from general quarters was called, right? So that meant, okay, the crisis is over, the drill is over, and we would take a few minutes to discuss, okay, how did it go? What could have been done better? And then the team leader in our particular place that we went to when general quarters was called, they would be responsible for providing that feedback to higher echelons, so that if changes needed to be made, they could be. Okay, so post-crisis recovery and review is the crucial last step. So real quickly, reviewing the 7 aspects of a general quarters plan, a crisis response plan. Number 1, have clear roles and responsibilities. Number 2, facilitate rapid mobilization and coordination. Number 3, have a clear chain of command so that decision making can happen quickly and appropriately. Number 4, you want to deal with containment and damage control on a triaged basis. Number 5, drill your plan and increase your preparedness. Number 6, be mindful of how leadership needs to act in order to sustain morale, good morale. And finally, number 7, have a post-recovery and review session after every drill and every actual crisis in order to improve future responses. So this is what the United States Navy has to teach us about dealing with a crisis in our business. And all this information, I'll put some of this, I'll put the key points in the show notes so that they're there for you. I encourage you to watch this show maybe a second or third time to review some of the points as you develop your own crisis response plan, and be aware that businesses do face crises. You need to figure out what those may be so that you can develop a proper response and ensure that your business can best survive an emergency or some kind of crisis that otherwise could potentially put you out of business. So I thank you very much for joining me today, especially my live viewers. Always a treat to know that you're watching. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And maybe strange for a USC grad, a Trojan like me. My topic is going to be the wisdom of John Wooden, one of the greatest coaches of all time. He, of course, at UCLA, our big crosstown rival to USC, I had the honor to hear John Wooden speak live many years ago. Never forgotten that speech. He's an amazing man, and I want to share some of his wisdom as it applies to running our businesses, running our professional practices, handling our financial lives. So I hope you'll tune in tomorrow, Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then next week on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Trusts and Estates Weekly. My guest is Tiffany Ballinger Floyd, and she's going to be talking about asset protection planning, a crucial part of proper estate planning. So I hope you'll tune in 10 a.m. Monday for my conversation with Tiffany. And then 1 week from today will be the next episode of Business Lessons from the Military. So again, thanks so much for watching. And thanks also to our sponsor, the Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Again, please go to NavyLeague.org if you're interested in knowing more about it and potentially becoming a member and helping us with our work. So that only remains for me to wish you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.